Hello and welcome to Let's H. I'm Hushchol, your host. Scroll down and click on the read more in the blurb, explore the links and become a patron on Patreon to support quality content. And I'm back with another episode of Angels Season 5. We're really putting a dent in this, and as recently I've been talking about more of the early episodes of the season, I thought I would jump a bit forward back to the later episodes of the season. Today we have Underneath, which is the 17th episode of Season 5. And you're gonna actually be kind of surprised because while this is written by Sarah Fain and Elizabeth Craft, it's actually a good episode. There are parts of it that I have problems with overall, but when I saw the writer's credits, I couldn't believe my eyes. This was actually a pretty good episode that worked very well in the context and had good moments with almost all of the characters. Wes even almost emoted. It's an interesting one because this continues the story of Lindsay and brings Eve back into more of the main spotlight. Unfortunately, it also introduces Marcus, who really is an annoying character. He's one of those characters that, and no offense to the actor, whenever you see him, you just want to hit him in the face. I don't know, this sounds really terrible, but there's a very few actors that I feel this way about. And it's probably just that they are able to channel this persona successfully, and bravo for that. Bravo for being able to do that. But this Marcus guy is just a gigantic douche. And some of the things that he does in this episode are not only excessive, but they're ridiculous. Like, the whole thing is built up to Eve signing away her perks as liaison to the senior partners, but this asshole is willing to kill a guy to do it? He agrees readily enough to Angel's insistence that his ideas are the only ones that matter, but that doesn't really change the fact that Angel had locked down the building with express orders that everybody, including him, was to stay out. The dude he killed was security personnel. Actions speak louder than words, dude. But he was sufficiently creepy, I guess. And he does play a douchey lawyer corporate type very well, so there is that. Overall, I suppose it is a good thing that he has that kind of look and feel and appearance. Unfortunately, when he figures back into the story later, it doesn't help a lot because he's so poorly written that he just becomes annoying. So I'm probably judging him based on what I've already seen later, since I'm going back through a lot of these and rewatching them to refresh myself on them so I can actually do a coherent review on them. That said, most of this episode is really good. It presents an extremely unsettling sense of eerie, creepy, and genuinely disturbing scary. The hell dimension that Lindsay is being held in has an idyllic sort of suburban appearance. It all looks ideal, but it's very superficial 1950s ideal, so we know there's something wrong there. And it also may be something that kind of was intended to ostracize those who don't see that as an ideal. Something that people don't always want. It's made even more disturbing by the modular quality of people. Gunn can just put on this necklace, forget who he really is, forget everything that happens, and keep going through this torture again and again and again. It's truly terrifying in that sense, but it's also terrifying to be inserted into a life that isn't your own, being intimate with someone who is obviously neither human nor interested in you, and even believing that something is your offspring that is neither human nor your offspring. Overall, it's truly horrifying and truly disturbing. We also have a few moments in this where the various characters react very believably and in interesting ways that develops them as characters to losing Fred. In fact, it's done a lot better than the previous episode, Shells. To be quite honest, I feel like they could have just combined A Hole in the World and Shells and then had this be the next episode. It goes well as a two-part story, continuing on from the story that was very poorly told in Shells and A Hole in the World, but as a three-part story it very much overstays its welcome. That's kind of my problem with it. Everybody's still very mopey, and that sets the tone for the whole episode. There are some genuinely funny lines in it though, and some very amusing things, but on the Angel side of things, it is a bit much, especially Gunn's manufactured plan just to beat himself up. It almost seems like a parody, because Angel's constantly whining and brooding. That's sort of his thing in the whole series. Yes, we know he's done terrible things, but past a point you have to just get over it. I know it's easier said than done, but we are all different people than we used to be. I can only imagine that someone that lives for centuries at a time would be a very, very different person than someone he was 200 years ago. To say nothing of having a soul again, whatever that actually means in the Buffyverse, which they're never actually certain of. They never really make it clear, but that's a problem for another day. It's always really good to see Lindsay, and I always like seeing Eve too. She's an interesting character and she's well acted. However, seeing Lindsay just makes me think of the horribly built-up story that had a very wet fart sort of resolution, or I should say non-resolution, and there was literally no reason to get him back into this. It made Eve seem like a weaker character because she was so dependent on Lindsay, and I suppose that had to be the token Sarah Fane and Elizabeth Craft writing a character fairly poorly. Eve had to be thrown under a bus in that sense. Which is especially unfortunate considering we only really learn anything about her in this episode, and then she doesn't have any of that anymore, and she's just this person. I did like the fact, though, that they referenced that running gag, that security at Wolfram and Hart is notoriously terrible. Like, it started off being one of the most difficult places to get access to, but more and more, Angel's team kept waltzing right in. At one point, they were in there half in disguise, and half in another disguise, and ran into each other in the elevator, and it was rather amusing when that happened. But it was nice to finally remember that, especially as they're on the other side of the business doors. It's also a fair point that Lorne really hasn't been treated well by Angel. In fact, he's been treated very poorly. Angel hasn't shown much concern over Lorne, or his feelings, or anything else. He's basically just used him for everything, and as Lorne points out in the beginning of this episode, he tries to tell people what they want to hear, and pretends that he's able to contribute. He's clearly not happy, and he has every reason not to be happy. It's just an unfortunate thing, though, that it takes so long and so much for him to do or say anything, or even threaten to leave, which he doesn't really do. And I don't know why he wouldn't. After being with Angel and friends as long as he has been, there's absolutely no reason why he wouldn't just up and leave. This is completely anathema to him. As he even points out near the end, Angel has changed so much and is willing to leave friends and allies behind, one after the other, and fail them. That's not the Angel he knew, and that's certainly not the Angel he signed on to work with and trust with his back, especially in a place as hostile as Wolfram and Hart. This episode makes it very clear how hostile that place is, and if the earlier account is to be believed, all one would need to do would be to give back the gift and leave. In Lorne's case, that's not a lot. And while I do like this episode, I think that this is going a bit far to tear down Angel and the supposed heroes. The same concern that I had with A Hole in the World and Shells is applicable here. Character destruction is not the same as development. Demolishing the heroic qualities of a hero character does not necessarily make that character more compelling, more developed, or better. But it was also noteworthy that they finally do actually address, was it a good idea to come to Wolfram and Hart or not? In fact, they address it at the beginning of the episode. As the episode starts, they're talking about this. Spike and Angel discuss this, and they are two of the best characters to discuss this. Spike brings up some great points, and Angel has to admit this is not a good place. Even if people did agree to come here of their own free will, maybe it wasn't that straightforward. And Wolfram and Hart is toxic. It affects everyone, and nobody really gets out unscathed. But I'm going to put a bookmark into that, and I'm going to talk about the subplot. The B-plot, if you will. Wes is basically babysitting Illyria. There's not a whole hell of a lot that happens, but Illyria is an interesting character, and we find out more about her. I thought it was especially interesting that she was capable of existing in multiple forms at the same time in the same place. The discussion about dimensions and dimensional travel was very good too, and it even had a little funny in it, which was good. It actually made me think that Wes may have started to emote in that moment, but he quickly caught himself and stopped it. In any case, the discussion between Illyria and Wes, which is very heavy on Illyria, talks about humanity, the limitations of humanity, and the limitations of this world. The scene also, as it unfolds, seems to be building up a plot that probably would have been better if they had had more time to do something with it. Unfortunately, we're winding up for the finale of the show, and this is building up the final storyline. But it seemed like what they wanted to do was build up that Fred was still there somewhere, drawing parallels on levels of the Earth to tie back to the hole in the world, with that same sort of imagery. Maybe Fred still existed in there somewhere. It keeps getting built up, but as we know the series is cancelled by now, we know that nothing's really going to come of that, and it's really unfortunate because that would have been something interesting to develop later on. It would have added more levels to the character, having Illyria and Fred occupy the same form and have to work with that kind of struggle. I have no doubts that the actress could do it. She's a good actress. Unfortunately, in this season, until Illyria happened, she didn't really have anything to do with her character, aside from one episode and a couple of scenes. This episode, however, gives her a lot of opportunity to develop who and what Illyria is and why she feels so alien on this planet, in this singular form at this singular time in a singular dimension. She's stuck with Wes, which would drive anybody crazy. But as most of the dialogue is hers and most of the meaningful dialogue is hers, he just serves to keep her talking, which is good because we don't want to hear him talk most of the time. The shrimp thing was funny though. I will give him that. She did a good setup, he replied to it well. I could almost see the old West sort of coming back at times, but as I said before, every time it started to do it, then it stopped again. It ends up on the rooftop, with perhaps the world's least convincing backdrop behind it, but TV, you know. The dialogue is at least good though. It's worth hearing and it's worth spending time with this character that they're very quickly trying to build up and develop since they know they don't have long. But going back to the whole Eve and Lindsay thing, Eve basically becomes a non-entity once Lindsay is saved. She's not important anymore, which is unfortunate because she was a better character than that and she deserved better than that. But as I said before, Sarah Fane and Elizabeth Craft generally do not do well together, and one character at least, especially a female character, is always thrown under a bus. I think one of the big reasons why this episode worked so well, though, was because by this point in the season, they had some idea of what they had to do to ultimately tie up the season. Because of that, and because of the fact that they were just coming off of a major story, all the heavy lifting had been done around them, and they just had to get from point A to point B. They did show an excellent craft in this, though, because there were so many parallels. Lindsay talking to the kid about the levels of the earth, the crust and the core, and all of that being reflected in the Wes and Lyria scene and Wes's dream, and then another parallel drawn to the corporate world, most specifically Angel and friends at Wolfram and Hart. The ultimate resolution of the story is especially poignant, considering it's not only an indictment of the corporate life and the corporate attitude, and was mentioned earlier by Spike about going through the motions and trying not to think about the good you're not doing, but actively being a part of evil and telling yourself that you're ultimately doing good or that there's nothing else you can do. This is something that I feel like has been said very poorly in a lot of stories. In this instance it was said particularly well because we've been waiting literally 17 episodes for them to actually confront this thing and call it what it is. In real life, as on Angel, this isn't okay. But most especially in this story, as it's building up for the finale, Lindsay points out they're working for the bad guys. They're working for the villain. That makes them villains themselves. Lila was no less a villain just because sometimes she would help Angel and sometimes she would do something else. She was still a villain. She was working for Wolfram and Hart. It seems almost unimaginable, though, that it's taken so long. Like, someone has literally had to die. And I always hate when this happens, when a character, supposedly a hero, is so deluded or shiftless that someone literally has to die to motivate them to come to a conclusion or think that what they're doing is not working. I never liked that. It's usually a very shoddy writing tactic that makes the character in question look especially bad. Honestly though, Angel has looked bad enough throughout most of the season up to now. It's nice if he gets himself kind of back on track. It's difficult to believe that anybody would sign on with their greatest villains for some time and expect to be doing good even if you do have greater resources at your disposal. No matter what they promise you, no matter what you get in a contract, no matter what they even do, they're still gonna try and find a loophole. They're evil. And they're lawyers, but I repeat myself, no one in their right mind would believe that this would be a good idea. Truly takes Gunn's sacrifice to kind of clue Angel in that maybe in fact this isn't a good idea. Maybe it's not something good to do. I liked how he talked with Gunn at the beginning, but he really should have realized what was going on. Angel just seems to be stumbling through the script. And that is a weakness of some of the earlier episodes in the season before now. He doesn't seem to be too aware of what's going on. The Angel of previous seasons, or at least the good ones, would have quickly and easily come to the conclusion that this was not a good idea. Where's the Angel who was willing to threaten Lila and actually stood up to her when she tried to target Cordelia? And to be honest, Lindsay is kind of an asshole, but he has a good point. He's researched the senior partners and he was trying to do his own thing. And he points out that's what heroes do. They don't sit behind a desk and sign their checks and act content that the world is going on just as it was before, day in and day out, which is another parallel between the delusional hell that Lindsay is trapped in for part of the episode and the corporate life that they've become used to at Wolfram and Hart. It's all very sobering, and it's taken nearly the entire season for them to come to a conclusion that most people would come to after 5 minutes. Still, at least they finally got there. And for that, I have to say, it is overall a much better episode than it is not. It's a good episode because it explores characters, their motivations and their personalities, finally brings to some satisfactory resolution whether or not signing on at Wolfram and Hart was a good idea, even if it did take someone dying to decide. And it moves the plot towards the ultimate resolution, or I should say non-resolution, that the very poor finale will take. But at least it's something, and for that, I did like it more than I disliked it. The last point I'd really like to make about this episode is Spike is supposed to be a magnificent fighter, really just top tier. He seeks out new challenges to better himself. That's been his entire existence. Why is it every time there's a fight, he's always getting his ass kicked? That doesn't make any sense. Stop having it happen. Also, whoever photographed this fight scene in this episode needs to be flogged. It literally gave me a bit of motion sickness. It was very badly done. I couldn't even make out what was going on half the time. These are not bad fighters. I've seen them in other episodes. But all that aside, it's overall a good episode. There are things to think about, things to be concerned with, questions that have no easy answers. But this episode, underneath, starts the plot moving again, and would have been a better second part to A Hole in the World, or A Hole in the World plus Shells, which was really that story that was drawn out way too long. It was just not very good. So on your watch through of Angel Season 5, I recommend Underneath, if nothing else to at least find out what happened to some characters, and to get a really good background on Illyria. Also, it's worth seeing one of the world's worst backdrops. Like, seriously, they couldn't have put some fairy lights on that? Soft focus, maybe? It looks better in its soft focus. But I'll be back next time with another episode. You're welcome. Bye.